Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar of today. This morning, we're talking about harmonized standards under the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling regulations. You're all muted today, so you'll not be able to ask your question out loud. My name is Els, by the way. I'm moderating the webinar in the background, and I'm sitting together with a few of my colleagues who will be going through the presentations. So as usual, you're all muted. You cannot speak out loud, but we do invite you to use the Q&A panel to submit your questions. The speakers that will present today will go over the questions as much as possible after the presentations. Should your question remain unreplied today, we will make a Q&A report available so you can have a look later. The webinar is being recording as well, so should you want to look and listen back to the presentations, you can do that afterwards. You will be informed when the recording is available as soon as possible. Should you be on Twitter, X, today called X, you can use the hashtag training for standards, and you can find CEN and CENELEC at standards for EU should you want to tag us. So without further ado, I give the floor to my colleague Benjamin, who is sitting next to me and will present you the speakers of today.
Hello, good morning. My name is Benjamin Deville. I'm a project manager at the CEN and CENELEC, and I'm in charge of the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling regulation topics. So I have the pleasure to have here with me Roy van den Born, who is representing VHK today. He's a consultant on eco-design activities. And I have also the pleasure to welcome Bernardo Martinez, representing the European Commission, specifically the DG Energy. He's also coordinating the eco-design topics among the different desk officer. We had connection problem, and Martial Patra, the chair of the coordination group on eco-design, is not able to speak today.
Well, maybe we can check because I see him connected. Yes. Martial, are you there? Can you say a little word? Is your connection fine? We cannot hear you. No, I'm sorry, we cannot hear him.
Okay. So just for information, there is a glossary with all the acronyms and the specific terms we are using in the presentation. I will not go through for the moment, but it's important to read it before reading the presentation that will be available on the website together with the recording of this session. What are the objectives of the session of today? In fact, it is to give to you an overview of the eco-design and the energy labeling systems. The goal is to demystify the harmonization process and the eco-design and energy regulation, because we receive a lot of questions on that. So we'll clarify that with the support of the GNR and VHK. The idea is to share the experience we gained during the last months after the reactivation of the contract for the consultancy and the assessment on the eco-design activities. We will also highlight the specificities of the assessment related to the eco-design. There are a lot of similarities with the AS assessments that you know very well, but there are also specificities linked with the eco-design. The final goal of the session today, it's in fact to increase the citation rate of the technical standards in the field of eco-design. And to reach that goal, we need to put in place a lot of check, a lot of best practice. And that's why we have our speakers today on the table. An important point is also the link between the current eco-design and energy labeling regulation and the future ESPR, so the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, that is in preparation at the European level, and that will be a kind of extension in all the direction of the Ecodesign current regulation. So it is important that the system is fully operational for Ecodesign today and to be used in the future when the ESPR will be released by the Commission. The agenda of today. So the DGNR and Bernardo Martinez will give an overview on the eco-design from the Commission point of view. I will describe the procedure to develop the standards and the basics for the harmonization. Then Roy van den Born will explain what is the role of the consultant and what is behind the concept of assessment. And then we'll provide you with a lot of very useful recommendation to increase the citation rate of the standards. And it is really based on the experience we gained during the last month. And finally, you will have the possibilities to raise questions, and we'll try to answer to the most general one, and we have the possibility also to answer in a written way after the workshop. So I give the floor to Bernardo.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. First of all, I think it's a very good idea that CEN and CENELEC has had to organize this seminar because the relationship between legislation and standards is very tight. It's very narrow and very close, but it's also complex. And so today, with the help of Roy, I guess, or I hope we are able to give more clarity to different issues or different aspects that have been the cause of confusion over time. So I will first start trying to explain a little bit the scope of what we are talking about from a legislative point of view, although I guess many of you already are familiar with the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling legislation. I would like to say that Ecodesign and Energy Labeling legislations basically sets requirements on the energy performance of the products that are in the scope. These are normally products which are called energy-related products. These are products that are using energy while they are being used by the consumer. And we have two legs. We have Ecodesign and we have energy labeling. Ecodesign is about setting minimum energy efficiency requirements so that products or only products that comply with those requirements can be placed on the market. The intention is obviously to phase out the worst performing products so that this cannot be placed on the market. And then we have energy labeling, which is not legislation about banning products in the market. It's about classifying the equipment according to their energy efficiency. So once that the products have passed these minimum thresholds set out in the Ecodesign legislation, they can be placed in the market, but they have to be displayed, or they have to display a label which informs the consumer about the energy performance of the device. This is mostly, in general words, what it is about. But depending on the product, itself, there may be more aspects to be included in both the Ecodesign and the energy labeling legislation. For instance, if it's a product like a boiler, which is using fuel, is working by combustion, then it's releasing also to the environment pollutants, it's emitting pollutants, and the Ecodesign legislation also sets limits to the emission of pollutants by this kind of equipment. So on the right-hand side, you can see, I think, the latest example that we have on the label, because it's the legislation on tumble dryers, which has been recently adopted, and you can see that there is a main part, the color part of the label informing about the energy efficiency of the device via an energy efficiency index. In this case, it's level B. The best one is A. And then there are other supplementary information that in this case of tumble dryers is the condensation efficiency, the level of noise, but depending on the product could be different information. So this is adapted on the function of the product. Well, obviously the legislation sets these requirements by means of specific values. So energy efficiency, for instance, is requested by means of a percentage in the energy efficiency. if we have emission limits, this comes, for instance, in milligrams per cubic meter of air. But these are values, and the values have to be obtained somehow. They have to be obtained by using the appropriate testing procedure. And these testing procedures are normally defined in the standards. Although the Ecodesign, both the Ecodesign and energy labeling legislation have a specific annex on calculation and methods, these are general requirements. The details, for instance, the layout of the laboratory or what instruments have to be used to measure specific parameters, these are normally laid down in the standards. This is because we have a complementarity between Ecodesign and energy labeling legislation and the standards. To give an idea about how broad is the legislation on Ecodesign and energy labeling, what you can have there, I think on the right-hand side is quite self-explanatory. There's a huge list of products and regulations related to the products that are in the scope of the legislation. But as summary, I can say that there are currently like 31 product groups affected, plus the horizontal standby regulation, which involves 3 billion of products in the scope. And this implies a consumption of around 50% of the EU final energy. This is carried out by 50 what we call implementing measures, which is the specific legislation for each of the products. As normally we have separate regulations for Ecodesign and for energy labeling. Normally one product is regulated by 2 regulations, one on Ecodesign and one on energy labeling, but there are exceptions. There are products which are only regulated by Ecodesign and don't have to display an energy labeling. So that's why the implementing measures, the number of implementing measures is not exactly the double of the product groups in the scope of the Ecodesign. So we have 43 Commission regulations, 1 regulation on the labeling of tires, and 2 voluntary agreements. That's basically the legislative layout that we have in place to regulate the Ecodesign and energy labeling for the different products in the scope. And as I said before, there is a complementarity between legislation and standardization, and in a way that normally, for each specific piece of legislation, we have several standards linked to it, addressing different testing methods and normally giving presumption of conformity of the product with respect to the rules set out in the legislation. So for you to have an idea, only for lighting, we have 22 related standards. For local space heaters, we have around 17 standards for the different types of local space heaters. For space and water heaters, there are 25 standards, and for air heating and cooling products, there are 11 standards, more or less. So this is just 4 of the product groups, four out of the 31 that I have just mentioned. So you can imagine the amount of standards that is linked to the different to the legislation. And you can imagine also that it's time that we modify or we update the legislation. This triggers kind of snowball in CEN and CENELEC because there are different standards that have to be adapted to the latest legal requirements. Now, some words on the benefits of standards, and I'd like to highlight the legal part. So there is an obvious benefit for the industry, which I would say it's a private benefit. The standards always provide common specifications that result in different benefits for the industry. So there can be a reduction of the testing costs. There can be, if this is different, for instance, devices that require interoperability, they facilitate the interoperability. So there are different benefits that are let's say exclusively limited to the private sphere. But there is also, in this case, a very important side, which is that a legal aspect, I would say, that is that the standards give presumption of conformity with the essential requirements laid down in the Ecodesign and energy labeling legislation. This means that when a product follows a harmonized standard, it proves to have been following the basic requirements on calculation methods laid down in Annex 3, normally it's Annex 3, of the product of the regulation, Ecodesign regulation of the specific product. For a standard to give presumption of conformity, it's necessary that it's harmonized, but it's not a sufficient condition. And I will try to explain that in the next slide. And the third benefit is that that I would like to mention is that the standards obviously support innovation, because eco-design legislation is by itself innovative. We are always trying to push for an improvement of the products to be placed on the market from the point of view of the energy efficiency and the emissions of pollutants. And but this has to be proved, as I said before, the values have to be proved via standards. So standards are there underpinning the legislative effort that we make to try to bring to the market better and better products. Now, well, I will just we'll use a slide to try to clarify important aspects about harmonized standards. It's quite extended, the idea that harmonized standards by themselves provide presumption of conformity, and this is not exactly the case. So the definition of harmonized standards is standards that are drafted by CEN and CENELEC or ETSI following a standardization request of the European Commission. So there is a request of the European Commission to CEN and CENELEC to draft a standard, because there have been new legislative requirements and update of the legislation, and the standards have to be drafted or updated. So the Commission issues a standardization request to the standardization bodies, and the result, which is a standard, hopefully, well, adopted by CEN and CENELEC, is a harmonized standard. But that's not, as I said, it's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition to provide presumption of conformity. For a standard to provide presumption of conformity, apart of being harmonized, it has to be cited in the official journal of the European Commission. There is where the standard levels up to its real legal value and provides presumption of conformity with the Ecodesign legislation and energy labeling. Conformity, when we speak about eco-design, means that a product has been tested according to the procedures set out in Annex 3 of the specific Ecodesign Act. As I mentioned before, the Annex 3 of any regulation on each of the products in the scope of eco-design lays down basic calculation methods and basic test procedures, but to a general extent. The details of that testing procedure, as I mentioned before, could be the layout of the lab, how the product is handled, the instruments that are used for measuring the different parameters. This is laid down in the standards, not really laid down in the Ecodesign Act. But there is, of course, always a kind of blue part, or gray part where both may merge, but the details in general are laid down in the standard. And their application is voluntary. Even if a harmonized standard provides presumption of conformity, the manufacturer may decide to apply a different standard. But, well, in that case, it could be that the product is different and that the standard is not valid. That could be the case. But if the manufacturer uses an alternative method, well, it may raise more questions from market surveillance authorities. So the manufacturer really has to prove and has to give very good explanations on why why they shifted away from the harmonized standard. Regarding the role of the Commission in the standardization, I think we are moving to what I call a new approach, which is an approach that gives the Commission a more active role on the standardization. And I have picked out a number of issues where this becomes quite illustrative and clear. So, for instance, the standardization request, which is a starting point for CEN and CENELEC to draft the harmonized standard, are going to be set will not be permanent anymore, because now we until now we have been working with permanent mandates, but they will have now specific deadlines, and this is normal, because when we come up with a new legislation, there are new requirements, and the standardization request has to gather these new requirements. We have to ask CEN and CENELEC what we want, and this cannot be done by a specific a permanent mandate which has maybe 20 years old. No, that's impossible. So this is the first sense of this new approach. Then when it comes to the citation of the standard, the citation will be carried out by a commission implementing decision, not anymore by a commission communication, which is a quite weaker or a document with weaker legal implications. And also consequence of this is that or related to this is that the date of cessation of a standard, which is in force, is to be set by this commission implementing decision. So when the commission cites the standard, if there is, for instance, a new version of the standard and there is an old one, and the new version has to enter into force, the commission is setting by the commission implementing decision when the new version of the standard is applied and when the old version of the standard ceases to apply. It's not understood anymore, this dawn clause that when a standard is adopted in CEN and CENELEC, a new version, it automatically replaces the old version. This is, as I said, decided and explained or set out in the commission implementing decision. And finally, a change of approach also with respect to transitional methods. You may know that we also, by commission communication, used to, in the lack of harmonized standard, used to issue a list of transitional methods that could be used when a product cannot be tested according to a harmonized standard. This will not be carried out by a commission communication anymore, but it should be an annex to the specific regulation. I have, summarizing the sequence of the standardization process would be then, first, the commission issues a standardization request via an implementing decision. Second, CEN and CENELEC accepts or may reject the standardization request. In that case, there should be a justification by CEN and CENELEC why they wouldn't accept the standardization request, but this can be the case. Assuming that the request has been accepted, then CEN and CENELEC would draft, ratify, and publish a standard following their usual procedures. And finally, the commission would cite the standard by implementing decision, or could reject it also. If the final standard doesn't address specific essential requirements, then the commission may reject it. But I hope this will not be the case very often. These are some examples, but probably I will just, because I don't know how we're going with the time, I will go quite fast. You can see here commission communication, which is the old approach, where the date of cessation, there is always a note in this commission communication saying that the perception of conformity, the cessation of the presumption of conformity will be the date of withdrawal of the previous version. So this doesn't happen automatically anymore, but we have this, which is a similar document, but different. You go into it. It's a commission implementing decision setting specifically the dates when the previous version of the standard ceases to apply and when the new one applies. Regarding transitional methods, this is an example also of a publication of transitional methods by commission communication, which will not happen anymore. The transitional methods will be part of the regulation. Good cooperation gives good results, and I'm happy to say that we are coordinating or strengthening our coordination with CEN and CENELEC, and this I think is delivering very good results. So we used to have a high rate of standards rejected for citation, and Roy van den Born will go more into detail on the reasons for that, but there were many formal reasons. Not really, some of them were technical reasons, some of them were purely formal, and this was a pity because it's a waste of energy by everybody that is standard just for formal aspects has to be rejected. This is changing. I think we have, as I said, a better coordination between a commission, our consultants, VHK, CEN and CENELEC, and what we hold now regular coordination meetings. We have much more direct contact with working groups to such extent that we exchange with the working groups before formal vote. We exchange the documents, and until the document is not really fit for purpose, we don't. We advise the working group not to take not to put the text forward to formal vote. And I think it's a win-win for everybody, for the industry, because they will have a uniform specification for conformity assessment, for market surveillance authorities, because they will have harmonized standards to setting rules for verification of conformity, CEN CENELEC because of the efficient use of resources, and of course the Commission, because by having harmonized standards and not rejecting them, but citing them, we gain, we achieve more effectiveness to reach the environmental target. About the future, well, you can see in this slide that we foresee that with the current measures until 2030, we will have still benefits in terms of energy efficiency, but our predictions are that this will level off, and by 2030 we will not have these benefits anymore. It means that we have to keep on renewing the legislation, and what means also that we have to keep on working on a standard. So for the future, we have 10 standardization requests scheduled for 2024 or between 2024 and 2025. So this number may grow, but so far we have 10, which will imply the modification of a lot of standards. And some, I think, final words on the ESPR, just a couple of slides on the new Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, which will replace the Ecodesign Directive, which is in force since 2009. And I would just like to mention some new features. So first of all, there will be, and I think this is the most important characteristic, a huge extension of the scope. And so the scope of the ESPR is going to reach basically every product which is placed on the market, not only energy related, but every kind of product. Except some very specific product groups. There will be new requirements to be able to track what they call substances of concern, which are maybe there's a component of hazard for the user, but this is still to be defined. The new SPR also will allow for horizontal eco-design requirements. So for instance, if you want to regulate not a specific product group, but just the electronic boards across a different line of products, this could be done. There will be an increased focus on informing and empowering the consumer through product information and the digital product passport. By the way, it's been discussed and I think agreed that this digital product passport will be developed via standards. And also, there is a plan for an incentivization of the best performing products, not only the energy related products, which the energy label is here and I have explained it, but there will be also ESPR labels for non-energy related products, like clothing, for instance, or furniture. And some aspects that are maintained, and this is my last slide, there will always be a classification of the priorities to address the different products. And so some products following the consumption of energy of the full life cycle of the product, those that are more energy consuming will be given priority, and this will be displayed in the working plan. We have currently a working plan 22-2024. Which will be replaced by a new one at the end of this period, and there will always be to address each product previous assessment before coming up with new legislation. We always carry out a study and an impact assessment to assess the different options that we have to regulate the product and achieve maximum gains with, if possible, the minimum cost for the society. And this is all on my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this clear explanation, Bernardo. Now let's go on some explanation on the development of the standards and the key information related to the harmonization procedure. I think it's important to summarize what was said before we start with Roy. Let's go back to the basics. In fact, the EU legislation and the European authorities are defining what we have to do. They are defining the goal. So it is decided and negotiated between the European Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. It's in fact the regulations. And the European harmonized standards are there to explain how to reach the goal, technically speaking. What is the role of CEN, CENELEC, and HC according to the regulation. And all the system is called the new approach, as said by Bernardo. It is important to keep in mind that there is a distinction between the legislation and the technical standards, and they are very closely coordinated. How do we start the process? In fact, the EU authorities have a lot of targets at very high level, and these targets are developed in what is called an annual Union work program for standardization. So it is a document which is prepared by the Commission on an annual basis, where they are listing a set of action that will have an impact on the standardization activities and that are supporting the objectives. In the version 2023, as you can see, out of 84 actions, 27 of them were covering the Ecodesign regulation. So you see on the graph, the energy transition and the reduction of consumption via the Ecodesign and the energy labeling is one of the key pillars for the green transition and the Green Deal. So we expect that Ecodesign and energy labeling action will remain very important in the next revision of the work plan, and maybe it will be the case in the next years. It's important to understand where it comes from. Regarding the harmonization of standards and the citation, there is a precondition for the citation of standards in the official journal of the European Union. It is the fact that we need a standardization request from the Commission. But to define the content of the standardization request, we have to start from the annual Union work program. It is the request from the Commission. And the Commission proposed a draft standardization request to CEN and CENELEC. So it is a very first draft that has to be discussed with the experts from the sectors. And that's why we create an ad hoc group, which is called, in our terms, the SHRAG, the Standardization Request Ad hoc Group, where there is a consultation and a discussion among the experts of the sectors, but also together with the desk officer in charge of the regulation. So it is an iterative process where the sector has the possibility to provide the Commission with a lot of comments to agree on a list of standards that will have to be delivered at the end of the process. So they agree on the list of standards, but they agree also on deadlines to deliver the standards. When the document is it's approved by the experts and the desk officer, it is circulated at Commission level in what is called the inter-service consultation, and then it is approved by the Committee of Standards. When it is approved, it is sent back to CEN and CENELEC for taking a decision. So it is important that CEN and CENELEC are informed about the content of the standardization request and take the decision as it will be a formal decision from the European Commission. So if it is approved by CEN and CENELEC, we consider that it's a kind of contract between the two organizations. It means also for the TCs that they have to start to develop the standards. When the standards are developed or are in the process of development, there are a set of assessments which is foreseen in the procedure to evaluate the compliance of the standard to support the specific regulation. When the assessments are considered as positive, are compliant, the standards can be offered to the European Commission, asking them to cite that in the official journal. So there are different steps in that process. When the standards are offered, it doesn't mean that they are immediately or directly cited in the official journal. So it is the decision of the European Commission based on a lot of parameters. What is important to note, it is the presumption of conformity that is given by the application of standards when it is cited in the official journal. So it means that if you apply the standards properly, you are compliant with the regulation supported by the standard. So it is important to keep in mind that that picture to understand the following of the presentation. Regarding the development of the homegrown harmonized standard, so homegrown, we mean by that is the EN standards, harmonized. Before the 1st of October of this year, we had a development process where 4 assessments were foreseen, but for eco-design and energy labeling, only the assessment at inquiry level, so just before the first vote, and at formal vote level, so just before the final vote, were in place for resources reason. Since the 1st of October this year, there is a new process, which is called innovative process for homegrown harmonized standard that has been put in place. So it is for all the work items created after the 1st of October. And in this new process, there are a lot of parameters. The most important is the quality check that will be performed by the CCMC on the standards. And the goal of this quality check is to prepare the standards before the formal assessment by the consultant to ensure there are a lot of points that are not blocking anymore. This quality check will be done on what is called a mature draft. So the mature draft is a document which is considered by the TC as mature on a technical point of view, but also mature on an harmonization point of view. There is a checklist which has been put in place, let's say, a long time ago, and it is one of the criteria to consider that the draft is mature. This checklist is fulfilled. This is a view, or synthetic view of the new process. I will not go into detail of that process because there is a webinar which is foreseen next Monday on that. So I invite you to register. It is still possible, and you will receive a lot of information on the detail regarding that process. What is important for today, it is to keep in mind what is the target. It is to increase the compliance assessment, to increase in fine the citation rate of the standard. So to improve the chance to have a compliant assessment, we modify a little bit the process of the development, and we introduce in orange the quality check. So there will be 2 quality checks, one during the first phase before the inquiry, and the second one before the formal vote. And if you see in the timeline, the quality check take place before the assessment in yellow, assessment done by the consultant. So we'll have 1 quality check, followed by 1 mandatory assessment on the mature draft. Then we have the possibility to have a second confirmatory assessment before the inquiry. So we have the vote here in red. We collect the comment also from the members, the technical comments. We integrate that in the standards, and then we can perform a second quality check at CCMC on the document for formal vote, which can be followed by the third assessment, which is called a pre-formal vote assessment, and it is a mandatory assessment. And there is a 4th assessment, which is called the last confirmatory assessment, which is an optional one if it is really needed. So we expect that in most of the case, not all the assessment will be performed, but it is available. What is different in that process in comparison with the previous one? It is the possibility that are given to the TC to adapt the draft after the different quality check and assessment. So Before the inquiry, there is a quality check. There is a phase to integrate the comments, an assessment, a second phase to integrate the comments, so it will maximize the chance to have a compliant standard. There is a specificity for Ecodesign and Energy Labeling regulation. It is the fact that you can contact directly the consultant and you can ask him to give you technical support and orientation already at the very beginning of the development process. I mean, when you are having a kickoff meeting to start the discussion on the standard, you can invite Roy or one of his colleagues in charge of the regulation to evaluate how the standard should be structured and what is the best direction to start the development. It is a very important and very useful opportunity which is given to the TCs also to start to integrate the harmonization aspect at the very beginning of the development of the standards. So Roy will insist on that in the presentation. What you see on the screen, it is the invitation to the innovative process for homegrown harmonized standards webinar that will be organized on Monday at 2 o'clock. Do not forget to register if you are interested to join. Okay.
So thank you, Benjamin. Good morning, everybody. My name is Roy van der Voren. I'm a resource consultant at VHK. I'm already for almost 15 years working there. VHK is based in the Netherlands and has a long track record in projects related to eco-design and energy labeling. We are also many years involved in the development or the monitoring of standards for the European Commission. And together with my colleagues from Vigant, DTI, Wade and Tate Consulting, we cover the standards that are related with eco-design and energy labeling products. For this project, I'm the technical project manager or coordinator. We started in 2013. At that time, we only covered 7 products, and the main task for us was to monitor those standards and represent the Commission in the meetings of the work groups. And if needed, we assisted also in technical standard-related questions. At that time, we did not do any assessments, as this was part of the new approach consultant that was under contract by CCMC. As already mentioned by Bernardo in his presentation, in the new approach, standards and the Commission influence on standardization work increased, and in 2017, our project also increased in size. We went from 7 products to over 20 mandates. Well, a mandate can cover more than 1 product, so it comes down to around 30 products. And we started monitoring over 100 standards. The main difference with our first project was that the performing assessments was added to our work. Then we come to our current project that started last year in August and will last for 30 months. It's a project that we do for DG Ener. This is important because the HAS consultants under contract by Ernst & Young are working for DG Grow. There are some overlap there in eco-design and energy labeling products. So that can be that some of the products are covered by DG Grow and the HAS consultant and not by us, but the majority of the products are within our scope. At the moment, we monitor 22 mandates and 65 technical committees or work groups and over 100 standards. As Bernardo showed already, 4 products covered over 70 standards, so it's a lot to monitor. The key task under this project is attending meetings, if possible, during the development process. There we can attend as observer. We do not have voting rights, but we can already flag formal or procedural issues in an early stage in an informal way, so that we do not have to tackle them in a formal assessment. This saves time, and it can also be really helpful for everybody to know what's going to happen in an assessment in an early stage. New in this project are meetings following an assessment report. It's mostly with the convener and secretary of the work group that we discuss the outcome of the report, discuss the issues that we flag, and see what the possibilities are to tackle these. In some cases, we need some clarification in how a test is done in a standard, but these are really rare occasions. And there are commission and CCMC meetings every month, at least once. And in these meetings, the development of the harmonized standards are being discussed. Can we make it more easy for the work groups? Can we answer technical questions? We try to have a close collaboration with CCMC and the Commission in order to have the harmonized standards published. When I say harmonized standards published, it has to be precise. The reference is published in the OJEU, not the standard itself. Should you want me or one of my colleagues to attend one of your meetings, just send me an email. There's no formal procedure to request our attendance. Other tasks in this project are helping both Commission and CCMC with technical questions. This can be during the meeting, but can also be in written, or question from market surveillance authorities, or within the Commission. We assist the Commission also in preparing transitional methods. Here we put the link between the requirement in the regulation and the test included in a test standard. We do not write the test methods ourselves. Furthermore, we assist in drafting new standardization requests and helping the policy officer answering possible questions that arise from the SREC, the standardization request ad hoc group, in order to get a mature draft that can be voted on in the Committee of Standards. Last but not least, on this slide, performing of assessments. We will do the assessments at 3 stages: before inquiry vote, before formal vote, and after publication. And with the last variety of standards and products in this project, we come down to over 100 assessments per year. The main aim is still to have, together with everybody, CCMC, work group members, the Commission, standards, their references, published in the OJEU. So this is a bit short about what we do and our role. I will go now more into detail about what is needed for a successful citation in the OJEU. So we start first with the question, why do we need harmonized standards? Well, the requirements included in the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling regulations need to be verified. In order to verify these requirements, we need robust, reliable, accurate, reproducible test methods. And that can be set, for instance, in a regulation, but that's not often done. One of the examples where this is done is the electronic displays, but most often the link is put in the transitional method. The requirement and the test method in a specific test standard are included in this transitional method. As Bernardo already mentioned, nowadays it's included in the Annex 3A of the regulations and not a separate Commission communication. The preferred option is, of course, a harmonized standard that's been developed following a standardization request. And after a positive outcome from our assessments, it can be referenced in the OJEU. There's also a legal framework that sets out the development of a harmonized standard. It can be with the new approach or new legislative framework, can also be with the standardization regulation, the 1025/2012 this is. I will not go into detail here because this is quite detailed, but in theory, it means that requirements set out in the union legislation have to be implemented at member state level. After that, the European Commission can issue a standardization request to the European Standardization Organization. There are 3 at this moment, CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI. And once they accept the standardization request, they start developing a harmonized standard. Be aware, a harmonized standard is a voluntary standard, while the regulation is mandatory. Once the standard has been harmonized and the reference is published in the OJEU, presumption of conformity is assumed with the requirements tackled in the test standard, and is from us understood that market surveillance authorities use these standards then to check the compliance of the products. This slide, just presented by Benjamin, gives an overview of our activities. We are active in every green area. My presentation for the rest will focus on the right bottom corner, the assessments. What do we assess? How do we assess? And what can we do to improve the outcome of these assessments? We follow the old procedure because at the time when we signed the contract, there was no new innovative process available. So we have two assessments that we do for the European for the CCMC, before inquiry and before formal vote, and one for the European Commission after publication. We are, however, flexible. If it's possible, we will also follow the new innovative process and have a fourth assessment at an early stage. Even if there is a last conformative assessment just before the formal vote, when possible, we will take that into account. So we try to be as flexible as possible. What do we assess? Well, the main difference between a normal standard and a harmonized standard is the addition of Annex ZA. In this annex, the link between the regulation and the test standard is set and is therefore of importance to be checked thoroughly. We will check if the correct template is used, if the correct references are made to the mandate, to the regulation, the OJEU publication, all procedural issues there. Once we have done that, we're going to check the content, not only editorial, but also checking the normative references, checking if the tests are robust, do not correct the regulation or cause conflicts with the regulation. And last, but maybe the smallest part of the assessment is the procedural formalities. We will check if in a work item the correct mandate is referenced and the regulation, but this is really a small formality. When normative reference standards are available to us, we will also include them in assessment, and this is one of the important issues that we find, and I will come back to that later. If possible, be precise and date those references. Our findings we include in a report that will be first discussed with the policy officer in charge of the product that the assessment of the standard refers to. Most of the time we agree, but if not, the policy officer always makes the final decision if he agrees with our findings or not. After the report will be shared with CCMC on a platform, and that will be shared then with the convener secretary of the specific technical committee or work group. So to be sure that the reports are shared, at this moment we also informally send these reports to the convener and the secretary so that we are sure that the issues found will be sent to the correct persons. We, however, do not make up the rules as consultants. They are based on publicly available documents. It doesn't matter how we get out of bed in the morning, these rules are the guidance for our assessment. The first two bullet points are documents from the European Commission that gives us guidance on what do we need to check, the formal issues. Also, normative references in the Vademekum Part 3 are mentioned. These are two documents that are really relevant from the Commission, but also from CCMC. On the boss pages, there are a couple of documents that are really relevant for us to follow. The internal regulations Part 3 for sure. This gives structure, rules on how to draft, harmonized or in standard in general. There's a new guidance document on normative references in harmonized standards. This gives step-by-step overview of how to implement normative references in a harmonized standard. The last bullet point is maybe the most important and new at this moment, is a checklist. This is a checklist that needs to be filled in by everybody, or every work group that wants to request an assessment. Without this checklist, we cannot start our assessment. This checklist is mandatory of the 1st of October this year. There is a webinar online explaining how this checklist is worked, what do you need to fill in. I will not go into detail. You can find it on online. So when we have this assessment, there are 3 possible outcomes. The first one is most preferred compliant outcome. That means that besides maybe some small editorial changes, no content issues are found, no procedural issues are found, and you can proceed to either the inquiry vote or formal vote. If this is a standard that's been published and offered for citation in the OJEU, then the outcome compliant means the reference will be published in the OJEU and an acceptance letter will be sent to CCMC. However, most of our assessments result in a lack of compliance outcome. These can be based on procedural issues or content issues. I will go into detail in the coming slides what are those procedural issues and content issues, but if there are issues there, lack of compliance outcome, the technical committee or the work group has to issue those findings first. They have to come up with an explanation or correct them in the standard before proceeding to the next stage. And therefore, we have this new meeting with the convener and secretary to see how to proceed and how to guide the work group into having the issues found tackled. There is a new outcome, the conditional compliance. This was introduced last year together with the Haas consultants from Ernst & Young. This is a compliance that only applies to standards that do not have a content issue and are developed in a series. So if there is a series, then the conditional compliance can occur when there are references to drafts or final drafts. This doesn't occur to any other standards that are not developed in a series. The outcome, however, means that there is a delay. It only can be published, you only can proceed once all of the reference standards are published. We started in 2017 with our first assessments. As you can see here in this chart, the first assessments in 2007 were 60. These were mostly on published standards. They were not yet in the development process. The year after, they went already to 89. And I'm not sure what happened in 2019, but we only received 10 assessment requests. This resulted in a backlog that had to be tackled. And in 2020, 2021, in a 10-month period, we managed to do 151 assessments. And it is understood that around 80, 100, 120 assessments per year are normal. After 2021, we were in between contracts, which was not favorable because there were a new backlog being formed. 48 standards at that moment were pending assessment. Luckily, we started last year, August, and we could tackle those assessment requests as soon as possible. And at this moment, we have 129 assessments done and 3 ongoing. Well, that has to be 6 because I just received 3 new assessments requests. So at this moment, since last year, we did 132 assessments. Of these 132 assessments, most of the assessments take place in heating and cooling products, as also could be seen on the slides of Bernardo. Those are quite diverse products with different fuels and only a small part of the standard takes care of a small part of the regulation requirements. So therefore, a lot of the standards take place in these areas, but almost all products covered within Ecodesign and Energy Labeling have had already at least one assessment. The assessments could take place in all stages: inquiry vote, formal vote, even last conformative assessments, and after publication. Shamefully, only 6 of these assessments resulted in a positive outcome, and the reference of these standards will be published in the OJEU. But this is part of the European Commission. We do not do that publication part. So what are the main reasons then for these rejections? Well, we have the procedural issues. These can be undated normative references, issues with the requirements of the regulation, issues with the standard itself, the clauses that are mentioned. I will go one by one in the coming slides, give examples on what issues are that we find and how can we resolve them, because these are issues that have nothing to do with the content of the standard, but result in a lack of compliance and a delay in the development process. We find also a lot of issues with the content. However, will not go into detail within this webinar. We just have 2 hours for this webinar, and if we have to discuss all issues that we find content related, I think we need 2 full days. We have to think with content related issues that the standard tries to correct the regulation, uses different calculation methods, uses different tolerances, includes market surveillance tolerances, which is not allowed, stuff like that. Also, editorial issues can be found. But one of the most important questions within the content is, does your standard need to be harmonized at all? When you only have references to other classes and your own test standard does not add any test or calculation or measurement method, then it might be better not to harmonize because it's covered in another harmonized standard. This will save time on our side and on your side. But again, this is content related and case by case, standard by standard, this is different. So we will not go into detail here. Here we see a bit graphical at the outcome of the findings that we have. 90% we find content issues. Again, we do not tackle that. We will focus on the 4 blue bars here, which we can see that the wrong usage of Annex ZA, ZZ template is at least 1 and 2 assessments the reason for already a lack of compliance. The undated normative reference is at 43%, regulatory issues 51%, and standardization issues, this means clauses or reference to clauses, 36%. They can occur all at the same time or one by one, but every bar is reason enough for us to already issue a negative outcome. And this is general for all the standards that are linked to Ecodesign and energy labeling. And we will focus on those in the coming slides. So we start with the wrong or incomplete Annex ZA template. Then how should normative references be used and not undated references? And afterwards, point 3 and point 4 have a bit of an overlap concerning rules, the procedural issues related to regulations, and procedural issues related to clauses. So let us start with the first one, the templates for Annex ZA and ZZ. Both templates for CEN and CENELEC, but also for Ecodesign and Energy Labeling, can be downloaded from the BOSS pages of CCMC. Be careful that you download the correct one, because there are small changes in names, Ecodesign and Energy Labeling, if you add them to your standard. Also, there are different templates for other regulations or directives, machinery directives, construction products regulation, etc. So download the correct template. That's the start. On the left side here, we see the CEN template. This gets an annex ZA, or if there are more regulations, ZB, ZC. On the right side, we see the CENELEC template for the Ecodesign annex ZZ, or ZZA, ZZB again, if there are more regulations. There's one difference between those templates, and that's the OJ reference of the regulation. Within CEN, this is in the header, and within CENELEC, this is added in the table. For the rest, those two templates are identical. What we ask for you is to change the red marked areas, include the number of the regulation and OJ reference, include the mandate and the OJ reference, and the name of the regulation that is covered. Only focus on those red areas, and our procedural issue concerning the template will quickly decrease and hopefully not non-exist soon. The small red part or high yellow highlighted part under the table can be deleted. The warnings, however, should stay. The second issue that we find often and more often in the later assessments have to do with the normative references used in the test standards. In, for instance, the Vademekum part 3, you can find an overview of the normative references, how they should be used. I give here in this slide and the next one a short overview of the common principles that needs to be used. First of all, as a general rule, references should be made to EN, ISO, or IEC standard. It's not a problem if you make a reference to another standard not developed by these standardization organizations, but it can cause a problem when the standard is not being translated into all EU languages, because a harmonized standard, once published, will be translated in all EU languages. So other standards might not do this, and that can cause a conflict. Furthermore, when you refer to a normative standard, you should be certain that that does not contradict provisions set out in the Union harmonized legislation. And when you normatively reference a standard, make sure that it's always dated. Dated standards are always, we can always follow. Undated, we cannot, because the latest published version is always applicable at that time. And if that means that the newest version is after the publication of the harmonized standard, we do not know what changes occurred and if they contradict the harmonized standard and the regulation. So always date that. And the last point here, even in a good practice, when possible, add a specific clause of that normative reference standard. This means that we only have to check those specific clauses in our assessments. If there's only a date, we have to go through the whole standard, and chances that we find issues increase then, and that would delay the process again. Make also sure that you reference published and publicly available standards. Referencing drafts or final drafts may result in a lack or conditional compliance. And it is also possible that those drafts are not available for sale. Sometimes the CEN drafts or final drafts are available, but CENELEC doesn't have that option. So make sure that you reference draft of a final published standards that are publicly available. Also, make sure that you do not normatively reference legal acts or legal requirements. In the templates that I showed you before, these templates are also informative. So only an informative link to the regulation can be used, annex or note, but never in a normative way. And of course, when there are laced deficiencies, do not use those references in your standard. We can find the normative references in clause 2, but also throughout the normative text. Everywhere, they need to be dated. In this example here, I will give more examples. They are just illustrative. They do not mean that the standard has not been updated. They might have been corrected. They are just for illustration purposes. In this case, there is an inconsistency. 2 standards have been dated, 3 haven't. Always add a date. Also, add the date when you refer to a standard in your normative text. And really, again, add a clause if possible. There is, however, one exception, and that's for CENELEC standards that have been based upon an IEC standard. Those standards can add an annex ZA, or in this example ZC, that's normative, in which the normative references of the international standard on the left are dated, and on the right, the European counterparts, which allows them to use undated references throughout the standard. But this is only for CENELEC standards based on IEC standards. In this example, there's already a reason for us to give a lack of compliance. When we look at the right side, the EN 6456, there's a reference to a draft amendment. Please make sure that once you have published your standard or after formal vote, that these references are to published versions and not drafts or final drafts. Now we go into the procedural issues that we find when referencing the regulation. It's not allowed to refer to regulation copy requirements in a normative way into the test standard. In this example, it's quite clear that the ecodesign and number are already mentioned in the titles, and even in the normative text, the requirements and implementation dates are mentioned. This is not allowed if for some reason you have to or you want to refer to a regulation or parts of a regulation. Only in an informative way we might be able to do this, but preferably not, because you need to be able to read the test standard in conjunction with the regulation. In this case, this standard has updated those clauses, and it was one of the 6 that had a positive outcome, but again, just for illustration purposes. Also make sure that you refer to essential requirements, referring to scope, definition, normative clauses, or requirements that you copy from the regulation is not allowed. The focus should be on the requirements that need a test or calculation method, and also refer only to test and calculation sections of your test standard. We found more issues with this, and therefore in the new standardization request, a separate annex is added with the parameters or the requirements that need to be covered and the location in the regulation. So in the new standardization request, you only have to copy the parameter and location from the standard, from the mandate, and include it in your Annex ZA or ZZA table. This example here shows that the table refers to the scope and definition of the regulation. Well, a regulation is always mandatory and a harmonized standard is voluntary, so it has no use in referring to these non-essential requirements, and therefore they should be deleted from this table. The last row, referring to Article 3.1, the ecodesign requirements, is correct. But which ecodesign requirements? It's not specified. So they need to be specified also. But the reference is to clause 3 of the test standard, and clause 3 deals with definition. There's also not a test or calculation method, so do not refer to the definition section. In this case, it's also incorrect and needs to be updated. As said before, the Article 3 referred to ecodesign requirements. It was not specified which ecodesign requirements. In this example here, we see that the parameter The requirement is mentioned, but not the location. So always make sure that you add location in the Ecodesign or energy labeling regulation and the parameter, the requirement that you cover. If the requirement occurs in more locations in the regulation, they can all be included in one row. They do not need to have a specific individual row when they cover the same requirement. So in this case, in this example, how do we improve the reference to the requirement? Well, we have the seasonal space heating energy efficiency. When looking into the Ecodesign regulation 2015-1188, we find in Annex 2 that the Ecodesign requirements for the seasonal space heating energy efficiency are mentioned. So we start with Annex 2.1a. Then it depends on the standard, if it's gas or liquid fuel or electric scope, to add the Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So be as precise as possible. Annex 2, 1A, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or more of them. If this requirement also occurs in Annex 3, then you add after the Annex 2, Annex 3 plus the following numbers. In the second column, there was a reference to the definition section. Again, this is not allowed. Only focus on test, calculation, measurement parts of your standard, as the definitions of the regulation will always prevail over the test standard. Similar issues we find with referencing clauses. Here, the clauses are again quite generic, but we have a rule for Ecodesign and energy labeling. Only refer the specific clauses that are necessary. It's better to refer to all subclauses than mention a whole clause, which might not be relevant, and we can find issues that result in a lack of compliance, and only mention those clauses that are relevant. In the second or in the third row, the clause 6 except 6.7 is not allowed. Only mention of clause 6 which are relevant. When having a closer look at this standard, clause 6 does not have any subclauses, so the addition of except 6.7 is irrelevant and causes already a lack of compliance because of a wrong reference. Clauses 7 and 8 are quite diverse with a lot of subclauses. So the question is then, do we need all subclauses for our test and measurement method? As there are general parts included in these clauses 7 and 8 that might be just an introduction to what's going to happen in that clause, and they are then not relevant to be mentioned in this table. So be precise. If you have to mention 10 subclauses, but they are relevant, mention those 10 subclauses rather than mentioning only the overall clause, because issues might be found and not all might be relevant. Again, we have here an example of a non-existing clause. In the third row, we see Annex 2, Clause 2. This is wrong because it's not specified which parameter, which requirement is mentioned, but also the clause 7.4, which is referred to, does not exist. I just copied the table of content because it's easier to see, but only refer to clauses that exist. This happens quite often. It seems silly, but it can happen when there's a renumbering and you do not check your Annex ZA or ZZA after that renumbering, or when there's a copy of a part to another clause. So always check after renumbering, after a copying of a piece into the different part of the standard, if the number in the table is still relevant. Then there's another rule that we have. Only refer to normative clauses of your test standard. A test standard should be able to be read without and done without the informative part. So by referring to informative parts, this is not referring to something that's just for information purposes. We have here an example that Annex B is added in the table of Annex ZZA, while Annex B is informative. this is not allowed. In this specific example, again, is an example because the Annex B is informative in an IEC standard. The European counterpart changed it to normative, and then it is allowed, but do not refer to informative parts of your test standard. So I know it's a lot of information and a lot of issues that result in a lack of compliance, while not going into detail on the content of a standard. So I'll give you here a short summary. When you start with a harmonized standard by adding the correct template ZA, ZZA, make sure that you have the correct one for eco-design or energy labeling. Then check your normative references, not only class 2, but also throughout the whole standard. And put a date behind the standard number and preferably add the class that's relevant for your test. Only refer to essential requirements in your table. Stating that something is not covered or not applicable is not done within the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling assessments. These can be done within other regulations or directives, but not within us. So only mention the essential requirements, add the location and name of that requirement, and make sure that you only add those requirements that are essential and covered by your standard. Similar to your clauses, only refer to the clauses that are really relevant for the test and measurement method to be dealt with the requirement, and refer to normative parts of your standard. Informative parts should not be included, and of course, check if your reference clause exists. This should prevent procedural issues from occurring and already improve the quality of your standard. Also, make sure if this goes too fast to check the checklist of CCMC. These points are also mentioned in there before you refer to or request an assessment from us. Okay, thank you for your attention. I will give the floor back to Els.
Yes, thank you very much, Roy, and all the other speakers, of course. I would like, before we go on the Q&A part, I would like to throw a poll to the audience. So I hope they're all still connected and attentive, because the poll simply asks our audience to give some feedback on our webinars, and especially, of course, the webinar of today. We will use the replies for improving our future webinars. So we leave the poll open for a while, and at the same time, while mostly Roy was speaking and the other speakers as well, we have been answering already a few of the questions that were entered in the Q&A. Some of them are still open, so I don't know who wants to take the floor first to go over one of the questions. I see, for example, that Bernardo tagged one question about tests to be performed by a third party, or can they be done by the manufacturer?
Yes. Yes, right. Okay. Actually, the question disappeared from my screen. So maybe we can see. Are the tests to be performed by a third party, or can they be done by the manufacturer? That depends, I think, on the product specific requirements. So as far as I know, most of the products currently regulated under the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling framework don't require third-party certification. I'm not sure if there is an exemption, but normally the tests and certification carried out by the manufacturer are valid without the intervention of the third party. We are rethinking about this approach to some products. And for instance, I can say as responsible for solid fuel boilers and solid fuel local space heaters, we are reflecting about the possibility that this third-party certification and not just the self-certification by the manufacturer. but this has to be laid down anyway in the product-specific legislation. And then there is another question on the link between harmonized standards for testing to show conformity and verification. Okay, procedures for market surveillance purposes. So yeah, indeed, this is a question with not a really very clear answer, but because it depends on the case. But normally, if the manufacturer is following harmonized standards, and then the product is checked already on the market by market surveillance authorities, it's quite easy for the market surveillance authorities, since the product has been tested according to harmonized standards, to be a presumption of conformity. So normally that will be easier for the market surveillance authority to ascertain. And that doesn't, of course, prevent the MSA, the market surveillance authority, to carry out tests, check that the information provided by the manufacturer is accurate. If the product doesn't follow a harmonized standard, then this is more, depending on the case, a matter of discussion between the MSA and the manufacturer. It may be that after discussing, the MSA agrees that a standard or the alternative procedure used by the manufacturer could be valid, and in that case, probably the MSA should adapt to that testing procedure, and if they wish to test, they should test according to that procedure. But if the MSA judges that the standard or the testing procedure used by the manufacturer is not reliable enough, they could force the manufacturer to test the product according to a harmonized standard. This is, I think, a matter of each specific case. It's not possible to give a general guideline valid to all specific cases, because this does not only depend on the product, but as I said, on each case. You can find on each product on the market.
Okay, thank you, Bernardo.
There's a question also from Giovanna Longo, saying we do not know how the future structure will work for future products. Does it make sense to start working on a specific product eco-design standards? Well, the answer is, again, there is no clear yes or no. As I said before, there is an order to be followed between the different steps, and everything starts with the standardization request from the Commission. So until the specific working group CEN and don't get this standardization request, probably will not know what they have to address in the standard. May happen that because there is a specific relationship between the policy officer and the working group, that this more or less is known, and then to gain time, I guess could start to work on the requirements for that product. That could also be the case, but in principle, if this is not clear, probably the working group shouldn't start working until the standardization request has been issued. Anyway, for eco-design products, there is normally always a period of a transitional period of around 2 years, and this can be used by the standardization body to develop the standards in time, so that they are ready when the new regulation